Tyra was sitting in the kitchen drinking her fifth cup of coffee at 3 in the morning, and there was still no sign of Ethan. This wasn't the first time he had gone on a drinking binge, but it hadn't happened often in the past. Recently, however, it had been happening all the time. Tyra smiled to herself. Women are strange, she thought. They worry that their husbands are cheating if they come home late. But she wasn't worried. She knew for sure that her husband could only cheat on her with alcohol. Tyra let out a sigh. She didn't like that her husband was drinking too much, but she felt helpless to change it. Ethan believed that his drinking was all her fault. She tried to hold back and not be controlling at home, but she didn't always succeed. Ethan claimed that she was a tyrant and didn't listen to others. He said that she was only used to giving orders. Their professions were vastly different, and it wasn't as much of an issue when their children were still living at home. But after they left for college, everything changed. Tyra had asked Ethan not to bring up her profession all the time, and she had cried many times over the issue. Tyra's husband, who was once a smart and promising lawyer, had become an excessive drinker. He used to only drink at home or at a bar, but now he didn't care where or when he drank. Tyra knew that it would only get worse. Her husband had completely lost faith in himself, and nothing seemed to be able to pull him out of this state. When Ethan got drunk, he would become like a storm, raging and trying to prove to Tyra that he was the boss in their home. But he was not successful because due to her profession, Tyra knew not only the basics of self-defense, but a little more than that. It was difficult for Tyra to see the man she loved trying to hurt her. It was unpleasant, and she felt that if it continued, she would have no choice but to end the relationship. Despite all the years they had been together, it was not worth it to her to suffer this kind of treatment. She heard the key turn in the door and knew that Ethan had finally come home. Tyra sat quietly and hoped that her husband would go straight to the living room and collapse on the sofa, as he often did when he was drunk. But her hopes were not fulfilled. Ethan went to the kitchen, and a moment later, the light came on. He had a drunken grin on his face. "Oh, look who's here! The boss in all her glory," Ethan slurred. "Ethan, aren't you tired of this?" Tyra asked. "Well, honey, how can you even get tired of this? I mean, I'm just having fun, alright? You, on the other hand, have a very serious job. You're the boss, and I'm just a simple man," he replied. Tyra winced. She had never boasted about her work in her life and had always tried to support her husband. She was having a hard time comprehending how Ethan had come to the conclusion that she was superior to him. He seemed to believe that she was both physically and intellectually superior. This was a new and confusing development, as Ethan had never shown any signs of jealousy or insecurity in the past, even when it came to Tyra's highly successful career. She couldn't help but wonder what had changed and what had led him to feel this way. Tyra was determined to get to the bottom of the situation and find a way to help Ethan see that they were equals and that their differences didn't diminish their love and respect for each other. Tyra was becoming increasingly convinced that someone or something must have played a role in shaping Ethan's newfound belief. Ethan had never been the type to compare himself to others in a negative way. "Ethan, I think that's enough already. You can't be doing this every single day. Don't you hate it yourself?" Tyra asked. Ethan hiccuped, tried to pour water from the faucet into a glass, but spilled it all over. He then threw the glass on the floor and almost tripped. "Shut up! The man is home!" He slammed his fist on the table and fell to the floor. He was out. Tyra almost cried, and she leaned over to her husband. "Listen to me carefully. If you don't want to do this the right way, it'll be some other way." She grabbed the phone and dialed. "Hello, Lance. Send a car to my house now, and a couple of people who know how to keep their mouths shut," Tyra said on the phone. "Mrs. Schwartz, you got a body there and want us to take it out or something?" Lance laughed. "Almost, Lance. Almost," Tyra replied. Ethan was passed out as soon as he got into the car. When he woke up, he found himself in the hallway and saw Tyra. He asked her, "What's going on?" She replied nonchalantly, "Nothing much." Tyra then told him that she had arranged for him to spend the night in a cell with a group of women who were serving long-term sentences. She added, "By the way, 3 of them murdered their husbands because of their alcohol addiction." "Tyra, are you insane?" Ethan exclaimed, but Tyra just clenched her jaw. "Too late, dear. You never listened to me, Tyra said and turned away. She was so tired. The door clanged shut and she heard the women in the cell gasp. She thought she didn't care anymore, or at least she tried not to. Tyra had been the head of the women's correctional facility for 5 years now. She was known for her exceptional leadership skills and unwavering determination. Despite her soft demeanor, she was a force to be reckoned with and had a strong character that could not be swayed easily. She had a clear vision and set high standards for herself and her staff. Her commitment to work and ability to make tough decisions made her an effective head of the women's correctional facility. Tyra had established a reputation as a no-nonsense leader who would stop at nothing to ensure the safety and well-being of her charges. Her determination and focus had earned her the respect of both her staff and the inmates, making her a respected and successful leader in her field. Meanwhile, Ethan sobered up a little. Now there was only one thought running through his head. His wife's patience is not limited. "Oh, what a good-looking man they've thrown in here with us," a woman said. "Something must be up with our Tyra." They approached him. They were all serving different sentences. "So, who the heck are you? What did you do to annoy our princess so much that she assigned you to us?" one of them asked. Ethan realized that they weren't going to attack him right away, so he smiled slightly. "I'm the husband of your princess." "What? Nah, that can't be true," the women said in disbelief. Ethan reached into his pocket for his driver's license and showed it to them. They looked, shook their heads, and then returned the license back to him. "What the heck are you doing here then?" Ethan smiled. "I guess my wife is trying to fix me. She wants me to do things her way." One of the inmates looked at him thoughtfully. "My husband also wanted me to shut up about his drinking problem. And where is he now?" she said, shrugging and sitting down at the table. Ethan looked at her in confusion. He thought that since they didn't attack him, they would all sit together and talk about how bad of a wife Tyra was. But the conversation took a different turn. Another woman pulled on his sleeve. "Let's get you a cup of coffee. You look like you had a rough night. Looks like we won't be bothered until morning, so you can relax. My name is Valencia and this is Victoria," she said, nodding at the women sitting at the table. "Those are Brianna and Kate," she said, pointing at 2 more women. "I'm Ethan. Nice to meet you," he said and sat down at the table with them. They gave him a cup of coffee, which tasted like it's not the first time it's been brewed. He took a sip and asked Victoria, "So, where is your husband? I'm sorry, but you didn't finish your story." Victoria turned to him. "He's done, and I'm here. My children are in the orphanage." "And what did alcohol have to do with it?" Ethan asked. "Do you really want to know? I'll tell you if you're interested. My husband started drinking and couldn't stop. We'd been married for 10 years. At first, I couldn't figure out what was going on. Then I found out that his friend from work introduced him to slot machines. And where there are slot machines, there's usually booze. I begged, I cried, I got on my knees. I told him there would be no good from all this. He would just get drunk and scream at me to shut up. He kept saying he was the man and he knows what he's doing. And then one day he got too drunk and we lost a lot. So much that they began to threaten us. He didn't tell me anything. He only drank more and more every day so that it wouldn't be so scary and he could forget about the debt. Eventually he died from some kind of substance. And then they came for me and the kids. They said that he owed a large sum and we should move out and give them the apartment. I sent them away right there. One of them grabbed my son and said that if I did not agree to their terms, then we were all finished. When I saw the fear in my son's eyes, I lost it. I just grabbed the knife that I had been using. I was in a crazy beast mode. Soon one of them was on the floor and the other guy was standing at the door. I lunged at him too. Long story short, I will only see my children again when they are grown up and only if they want to see me at all. Ethan sat there silently. He was actually sitting next to a woman who had killed 2 people. It's one thing to read such a story somewhere and not believe it because most of it has been fabricated, and another thing to hear it firsthand like that. For a while the women were silent. Then another one spoke up. Her name was Martha. She was serving time in prison and had a difficult story to tell as well. Ethan found himself at a loss for words and didn't know how to respond to Martha's story. He considered saying something cliched but ultimately decided against it. He realized that he no longer felt like drinking and heard the sound of someone crying coming from the youngest of the women in the cell. She started sharing her story, saying that she was not at fault for her circumstances. Ethan knew it wouldn't be appropriate to ask what she was in jail for, but she briefly mentioned that her mother had passed away, her father had brought in a new partner, and they had accumulated a lot of debt due to heavy drinking. As a result, she had been given away to pay off her debts, and in a moment of desperation, she had attacked the person she was given away to with a statuette. The injustice of the situation was that she was not to blame for what had happened, but she had been given such a long sentence that even those serving life sentences were shocked. Ethan spoke up, expressing his anger and saying it could have been self-defense in the heat of passion. Valencia looked at him and said, "You sound just like a lawyer." She also pointed out that Brianna would not have the means to hire a lawyer, and the man she had attacked had much more resources. Ethan felt frustrated and a thought was swirling in his head, but he didn't know what it was. "Brianna, can I have a word with you?" She approached and Ethan introduced himself. "Brianna, my name is Ethan. I was once a lawyer, not for long though, because I was foolish enough to quit. Can you tell me everything that happened to you? And most importantly, provide the names of those who know at least something about it. I won't promise anything, but I'll try. I will try to help you." Brianna looked at Ethan in surprise, then at Valencia, who appeared to be in charge of the situation. Valencia then looked at Ethan with skepticism and said, "Are you going to keep your word? I don't want you to give her false hope. She's had enough already." Ethan replied, "I said that I would do everything I can." Meanwhile, Tyra felt out of place and realized she had made a big mistake. She feared that Ethan would be upset with her and would never stop drinking now. She briefly considered ordering him to be brought to her, but ultimately decided against it. She instead called Johnson and a couple of guards and headed towards the cell. Tyra was apprehensive about what she might see in the cell, fearing that the women inside might attack her. As she entered the cell, surprisingly she found it to be quiet. She ordered the door to be opened, and as it opened, everyone froze. Ethan was sitting at a table surrounded by the prisoners, and they were all engaged in a peaceful conversation, even smiling. Ethan turned to see Tyra and greeted her by saying, "Oh, Tyra, hi." She was left speechless, surprised by the scene in front of her. "What's going on here?" Tyra asked, and before she had a chance to receive an answer, Ethan got up and left the cell, waving farewell to everyone and receiving a bunch of good wishes. The guards and Tyra were amazed, as this cell was known for being the most unruly. "Ethan, are you okay?" Tyra asked. "I'm fine. We don't have much time. Let's go home. I need to shave and wash. I have to find one guy." And he quickly led her down the corridor. Tyra was feeling confused and overwhelmed by the sudden changes in her husband. He had been struggling with alcohol addiction for as long as she could remember. However, to her surprise, he had been sober for a week now, and she was struggling to adjust to this new version of him. Tyra was finding it difficult to recognize the person standing in front of her. The change was so sudden and drastic that she was having a hard time processing it. Tyra's emotions were a mix of confusion, disbelief, and hope. She could not understand how this sudden transformation had occurred, but at the same time, she was hopeful for their future together and the possibility of a better life for both of them. She was curious about what had occurred in the cell. She asked him, "Ethan, you have been disappearing somewhere. Do you want to tell me something?" He turned to her and said, "That young lady in your cell, Brianna, I think she was unfairly imprisoned. Her life was ruined. Her stepmother and the person she attacked should be in her place. I'm sorry, I should have told you earlier. I'm just consumed studying her case. Perhaps I can find a way out for her," Ethan said. "Wow, I can't believe my Ethan is back." Tyra stood there for a moment. Then she rushed towards him and hugged him tightly. "I'm sorry, honey. I had been a total idiot. And thank you for putting my life back on track," he said. Ethan worked tirelessly for 6 months. He was determined to see justice served and was willing to go to great lengths to ensure that the truth was brought to light. The long-awaited retrial was the culmination of all of his hard work and effort. Ethan had meticulously gathered a number of witnesses who could provide valuable testimony in the case. He had also managed to track down the doctor who had been bribed to provide false testimony in the original trial, and was determined to make sure that this key piece of evidence was presented in the retrial. Despite the many challenges that he faced, Ethan remained focused and committed to his goal, and was confident that the retrial would result in a just outcome. Brianna was released, and her stepmother and the man who had been involved in her trafficking were taken into custody. Ethan acted as their lawyer and argued strongly for their prosecution under human trafficking laws. Brianna was so overcome with emotion that she couldn't even stand up right away. Ethan rushed to her and helped her to her feet. He then seated her in a chair in the hallway. An older woman approached them, also crying. It turned out to be Brianna's grandmother, who lived in a small town in another state and had not known that her granddaughter was in prison. Brianna threw herself into her grandmother's arms, crying even harder. Ethan and Tyra finally left the court. Tyra looked at her husband and said, "I have never been so proud of anyone as I am now of you." Ethan smiled but did not have time to say anything as a boy ran up to them and handed Ethan an envelope. "Delivered," the boy said and ran off. Ethan carefully opened the envelope and a note fell out of it. It read, "The fireplace. A table for two is booked. In the prison, they respect those who keep their word." Ethan laughed. "Well, Tyra, I guess we're having a free dinner. A gift